Sarah pressed her back against the cabin's heavy wooden door, breathing hard from the trek through the snow. Her scrubs were soaked through, clinging to her rounded belly like a second skin. The warmth inside felt almost aggressive after the brutal cold. Her glasses fogged immediately, forcing her to remove them and squint into the amber-lit interior. The silence was wrong. That was her first coherent thought as her breathing steadied. Not just quiet, wrong. As an ER physician, Sarah knew the difference between peaceful silence and the kind that made your skin crawl. This fell squarely into the latter category. "Hello?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Is anyone home?" No answer. Just the whisper of flames in the fireplace and the howl of wind against the windows. Sarah wiped her glasses clean and surveyed the room more carefully. Everything looked lived in, recently used. A half-finished cup of coffee sat steaming on the mantel. Fresh wood was stacked beside the hearth, bark still damp with melted snow. The bread on the counter. She could smell it now, yeast and warmth cutting through the cabin's mustiness. Another contraction seized her, stronger this time. Sarah gripped the doorframe, counting through the pain. 30 seconds. Still early labor, but definitely labor. She'd been having intermittent cramping for hours, dismissing it as stress from the drive and the circumstances. Her mother's funeral was tomorrow, today now, and Sarah had been dreading it almost as much as she'd dreaded making the 6-hour drive from Minneapolis in her condition. David had begged her not to go. "You're 36 weeks pregnant, Sarah. What if something happens?" But she'd insisted, driven by some masochistic need to see her mother buried, to witness the end of 34 years of complicated, painful history. Now she was trapped in a stranger's home, potentially in labor, with no cell service and a blizzard raging outside. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. Sarah shrugged out of her soaked coat and hung it by the door, then moved deeper into the cabin. The layout was simple: main room with kitchen area, bathroom tucked under the stairs, and what appeared to be a loft bedroom above. Rustic but well-maintained, the kind of place wealthy urbanites bought as weekend retreats from their stressful lives. She tried her phone again. Still no signal. The landline on the kitchen counter had no dial tone. "Perfect," she muttered, then louder. "If anyone's here, I'm a doctor. My car went off the road in the storm. I just need to wait it out." Her voice seemed to be swallowed by the cabin itself, absorbed into the wooden walls and low ceiling beams. Sarah found herself tiptoeing as she explored, though she couldn't say why. Everything suggested recent habitation. Toiletries in the bathroom, food in the refrigerator, even a newspaper folded on the coffee table. But the date on the newspaper made her pause. December 15th, 1987. Sarah blinked, certain she was misreading. But no, the paper was clearly dated over 30 years ago, yet it looked fresh. No yellowing, no brittle edges. The coffee cup was still warm to the touch, the bread still soft. Another contraction gripped her, this one strong enough to double her over. She braced herself against the kitchen counter, breathing through it, definitely getting stronger, more regular. She glanced at her watch, 7:23 p.m. She'd been tracking them subconsciously, and they were coming every 8 to 10 minutes now. The smart thing would be to try to reach the road, flag down help. But the storm showed no signs of letting up, and walking in her condition could be dangerous. Besides, whoever lived here would return eventually. She just needed to wait. Sarah climbed the stairs carefully, one hand on the railing, the other supporting her belly. The wood creaked under her weight, but felt solid. At the top was a small landing with 2 doors, one standing open to reveal a cozy bedroom, the other closed tight. She tried the closed door first, more out of curiosity than anything else. Locked. The brass doorknob was so cold it burned her palm, despite the cabin's warmth. Strange. The bedroom was inviting, with a quilted bed and more of those amber glowing lamps. Sarah settled onto the bed's edge and tried her phone one more time. Nothing. She was truly cut off, alone except for whoever owned this place. Through the bedroom window she could see nothing but white. The storm had intensified, if that was possible. Snow struck the glass like thrown sand, and the wind sounded like something alive and angry. Another contraction hit, and this time Sarah felt something else, a subtle shift, a sense of pressure that made her breath catch. She'd delivered enough babies to know what it meant. Her daughter was coming, tonight, in this strange cabin with its 2 warm bread and 30-year-old newspapers and locked upstairs room. As if responding to her realization, she heard something that made her blood run cold, the soft sound of a baby crying, muffled and distant, coming from behind the locked door. Sarah froze on the edge of the bed, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as the crying continued, soft, rhythmic, heartbreaking. The sound of a newborn in distress, the kind that triggered every maternal instinct she developed over 8 months of pregnancy. But it was impossible. She'd just tried that door, and it was locked tight. The crying stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Sarah waited, holding her breath, but heard only the wind and her own thundering heartbeat. Maybe she'd imagined it. Labor could play tricks on the mind, and stress certainly could. How many times had she seen expectant mothers in the ER convinced they heard their babies crying before birth? It was a documented phenomenon, auditory hallucinations brought on by hormonal changes and anxiety. She needed to focus on something real, something grounding. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, even though she knew there was no signal. David's name sat at the top of her favorites list, and seeing it sent a pang of guilt through her chest. They'd fought before she left. Not a screaming match, David wasn't the type, but one of those cold, disappointed conversations that somehow hurt worse than yelling. He'd been preparing for her mother's funeral in his methodical way, researching the drive time, checking weather reports, even mapping out hospitals along the route just in case. Classic David, trying to control every variable, minimize every risk. "We could fly," he'd suggested for the 10th time, standing in their kitchen doorway in his reading glasses and weekend flannel. "I know you hate flying pregnant, but it's safer than driving 6 hours in winter weather." "I'm not flying to my mother's funeral 8 months pregnant," Sarah had replied, not looking up from where she was packing her overnight bag. "Besides, women have been driving while pregnant since cars were invented. I'm a doctor, not an invalid." That was when his voice had gotten that particular tone, patient but strained, like he was explaining something to a difficult resident. "Sarah, you're being irrational. This isn't about your medical expertise. It's about unnecessary risk." The word irrational had hit like a slap. She'd spun around, her pregnancy making the movement awkward and off balance. "Don't you dare use that word with me. This is my mother we're talking about." "A mother you haven't spoken to in 3 years, David had said quietly. And there it was, the heart of it. He'd never understood her relationship with Eleanor Chen, the complicated mixture of love and resentment that had defined Sarah's entire adult life. How could he? David's parents were lovely, supportive people who called every Sunday and sent thoughtful gifts and had cried tears of joy when Sarah announced her pregnancy. Eleanor Chen had responded to the news with a terse email, "I hope you're taking your vitamins." Another contraction seized Sarah, pulling her back to the present. She gripped the quilt, breathing through it, counting. 7 minutes since the last one, definitely progressing. She thought about the life waiting for her back in Minneapolis, the nursery they'd spent weeks decorating in soft yellows and greens since they'd decided to wait to learn the baby's sex. David's careful spreadsheets tracking their expenses and preparations, their circle of friends, other young professionals starting families, weekend barbecues where they discussed preschools and college funds, and whose turn it was to host book club. It was a good life. A stable life. Everything Sarah had thought she wanted when she'd fled her mother's house at 18 for pre-med studies. Yet lately she'd been feeling something she couldn't quite name, not dissatisfaction exactly, but a sense of incompleteness, as if she were living someone else's careful, planned existence. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs, and Sarah smiled despite everything. At least her daughter seemed to have opinions. According to the ultrasound technician, she was measuring large for dates, active, with a strong heartbeat. "This one's going to keep you on your toes," the woman had said with a laugh. Sarah hoped so. She hoped her daughter would be nothing like the compliant, straight, a student Sarah had been, desperate for approval she never received. She hoped she'd be bold, messy, unafraid to disappoint people if it meant being true to herself. Through the storm's howl, Sarah heard something else, a sound like footsteps on the stairs. Her pulse spiked. Finally, the cabin's owner returning. She stood carefully, one hand on her lower back, and moved toward the bedroom door. "Hello?" she called out. "I'm up here. I'm sorry for intruding, but my car—" The footsteps stopped. Sarah waited, listening, but heard nothing more. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. "Hello?" she tried again. From behind the locked door came another sound. Not crying this time, but something worse. The creak of floorboards, as if someone was moving around inside that impossible room. Sarah's medical training warred with a more primitive instinct that screamed danger. She was alone, vulnerable, and something was very wrong with this place. Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and this time she felt her water break. The warm fluid soaked through Sarah's maternity leggings, pooling on the hardwood floor beneath her feet. For a moment, she stood frozen, staring down at the unmistakable evidence that her labor had just shifted into an entirely different gear. Her medical mind catalogued the facts with clinical detachment: clear fluid, no meconium staining visible, contractions now 6 minutes apart and intensifying. Active labor, no turning back. But the part of her that wasn't Dr. Sarah Chen, the part that was just a terrified woman alone in a storm, wanted to scream. The footsteps downstairs resumed, deliberate and measured. Sarah grabbed a towel from the bedroom's small dresser and pressed it between her legs, then moved to the top of the stairs. The amber light from below cast shifting shadows on the walls, and she could see a figure moving in the main room. "Hello?" she called again, relief flooding her voice. "Thank God you're here. I'm having a baby. My water just broke. Do you have a phone? Can you call 911? The figure stopped moving but didn't respond. Sarah could see only a silhouette from her angle, tall, wearing what looked like a long coat or dress. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Please," Sarah said, gripping the banister as another contraction built. "I'm a doctor, but I need help. I need to get to a hospital." Finally, a voice drifted up from below, soft, feminine, with an accent Sarah couldn't place. "The hospital is too far, dear, much too far in this storm." Something about the woman's tone made Sarah's skin prickle, too calm, almost dreamy, as if discussing the weather rather than a medical emergency. "Have to try," Sarah insisted, starting down the stairs despite her unsteady legs. "This is my first baby, and there could be complications. I can't deliver here." "Can't you?" The voice was closer now, though Sarah still couldn't make out the woman's features in the shifting light. "Women have been birthing babies for thousands of years without hospitals. The body knows what to do." Sarah reached the main room, but the space appeared empty. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Where are you? I heard you just now." Silence. She turned in a slow circle, scanning every corner, every shadow. The fire still crackled, the coffee cup still steamed, but there was no one there. A contraction seized her, stronger than any yet, and Sarah doubled over, gripping the back of the sofa. The pain was immediate, consuming, nothing like the gradual build-up she'd expected from her textbooks and birthing classes. This felt urgent, primal, as if her body had suddenly decided to compress 12 hours of labor into 12 minutes. As the pain ebbed, she heard it again, the soft crying from upstairs. But this time, it wasn't alone. Multiple babies were crying now, a chorus of newborn voices that seemed to echo from behind that locked door. Sarah's rational mind offered explanations: stress-induced hallucinations, the storm playing tricks with sound, her own psychological projection of fears about motherhood. But her instincts, the same ones that had kept her alive through residency and countless emergency situations, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by that voice again, now coming from directly behind her. "The room upstairs is ready for you, Sarah." Sarah spun around, but there was still no one there. The voice had known her name. How could it know her name? "Who are you?" she whispered. No answer, but the locked door upstairs creaked open with a sound like a sigh. Sarah stared up at the landing, her breath coming in short gasps. The door she'd tried earlier, the one with the brass handle so cold it burned. It was standing wide open now, revealing only darkness beyond the threshold. Another contraction hit, and this one brought an undeniable urge to push. Her body was moving too fast, labor progressing at an impossible pace. She needed help, needed medical intervention, but the storm outside raged with undiminished fury, and the mysterious voice was right about one thing: no ambulance was reaching this place tonight. She had to make a choice. She could stay down here in the familiar main room, try to deliver her baby alone by the fireplace with whatever supplies she could find. Or she could go upstairs, through that door that had been locked moments ago, into whatever waited in the darkness beyond. The baby kicked hard, as if urging her forward. Sarah closed her eyes, placed both hands on her belly, and felt something she'd never experienced before: a pull, a calling, as if her daughter was guiding her towards something inevitable. When she opened her eyes, a soft glow was emanating from the open doorway upstairs, warm and golden, strangely welcoming. The crying had stopped, replaced by a profound silence that felt less wrong than expectant. Sarah took a deep breath and began climbing the stairs. Sarah's foot hovered over the third step, her hand gripping the banister with white knuckles. The golden glow from the open doorway pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat, but everything in her training screamed against moving toward it. In the ER, she'd learned to trust her instincts about danger, the subtle wrongness that preceded violent patients, the atmospheric shift before a case turned critical. This felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in fog, unable to see the drop, but sensing the vast emptiness below. Another contraction seized her, and she pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the banister, counting breaths. 4 minutes between them now. Her daughter was coming, whether she was ready or not, but the speed terrified her. First labors weren't supposed to progress this rapidly. In her 8 years of emergency medicine, she'd delivered exactly 3 babies, all uncomplicated, all with experienced nurses at her side, all in sterile hospital rooms with full NICU backup 30 seconds away. Here, she had nothing: no monitors, no 4 access, no way to track fetal heart tones or intervene if something went wrong. The statistics she'd memorized in medical school scrolled through her mind like a grim ticker tape: shoulder dystocia, cord prolapse, postpartum hemorrhage, all the ways birth could become death in minutes. "Just go back downstairs," she whispered to herself. "Stay by the fire." Women delivered babies at home for centuries, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true for her. Those women had midwives, experienced mothers, communities of knowledge passed down through generations. Sarah had textbook theory and a panic that was building in her chest like steam in a pressure cooker. The voice from downstairs echoed in her memory. "The room upstairs is ready for you, Sarah." How had it known her name? She hadn't introduced herself, hadn't left identification lying around. The possibilities made her stomach clench with something beyond labor pain. Someone had been watching her, waiting for her. But that was impossible. Her car crash had been random, the cabin an accident of desperate searching in a whiteout, unless it hadn't been random at all. Sarah thought about the newspaper dated 1987, the fresh coffee, the warm bread that defied explanation, the locked door that had opened at the precise moment her labor intensified. She was a woman of science, trained to find logical explanations, but nothing about this place followed natural law. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Not a call, just the low battery warning. Soon she'd lose even the illusion of connection to the outside world. David would be frantic when she didn't answer his texts. He'd probably called the highway patrol by now, maybe even started driving north himself despite the storm. The thought of him searching for her, not knowing she was safe, added guilt to her growing list of fears. She was safe. The doubt crept in like ice water. The crying babies, the impossible timing, the voice that knew her name. What if this wasn't shelter but trap? Through the cabin's windows she could see nothing but white. The storm had intensified, if that was possible, turning the world into a wall of wind and snow. Even if she could somehow reach her car, even if it still ran, the roads were impassable. She was cut off, isolated, with only her medical knowledge and diminishing strength to rely on. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, a sharp reminder of what was at stake, not just her own life, but her daughter's. Every minute she hesitated was a minute closer to delivering alone in a place that felt more wrong with every passing moment. Another contraction hit, this one with an intensity that drove her to her knees on the stairs. The urge to push was overwhelming, primal, her body taking over despite her mind's protests. She couldn't fight physiology. Labor was a train that had left the station, and she was either going to ride it safely to the end or get crushed beneath its wheels. But the golden glow from upstairs felt like a lure now, a trap disguised as sanctuary. Every instinct she'd developed through years of emergency medicine told her that walking toward that light was walking toward danger. Yet where else could she go? Back to the main room, where mysterious voices spoke from empty air? Outside into the storm that could kill them both? Sarah pressed her hands against her belly, feeling her daughter move restlessly beneath her skin. "What do I do?" she whispered. "Where is it safe for you?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and she realized with a chill that she wasn't sure anywhere was safe anymore. The cabin had revealed itself as something beyond her understanding, a place where the normal rules didn't apply, but it was the only shelter she had, and her daughter was coming regardless of her fears. The golden glow pulsed brighter, almost urgently, and Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. Her daughter's cry, soft and distant, coming from behind the open door above. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The cry was unmistakable, a newborn's wail, thin and urgent, exactly the sound she'd been anticipating for months. But her daughter was still inside her, still moving beneath her ribs. The medical impossibility of it should have anchored her to logic, but instead it shattered the last of her resistance. She was on her feet before conscious thought caught up, climbing the stairs with desperate purpose. Each step felt like crossing into deeper water, the familiar world receding behind her. The golden light grew stronger, warmer, and that impossible cry called to something primal in her chest. The maternal instinct that had been building for 8 months now twisted into something she didn't recognize. "I'm coming," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the crying baby or to her own unborn daughter. The distinction seemed less important with each step. At the landing, she paused at the threshold of the open door. The brass handle that had burned her fingers before now felt warm, almost welcoming. Beyond the doorway, the golden light revealed a room that couldn't exist, vast and impossible, stretching far beyond the cabin's modest footprint. The walls were lined with cribs, dozens of them, each glowing softly in the amber light. Sarah's medical mind catalogued details even as her heart hammered with terror. White wood, pristine linens, each crib holding a perfectly still bundle. The crying had stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like being underwater. She should run. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to turn around, to flee back downstairs, to take her chances with the storm rather than step into this impossible space. Instead, she crossed the threshold. The moment her foot touched the room's floor, the door swung shut behind her with a soft click. Sarah spun around, grabbing for the handle, but it turned uselessly in her grip. She was trapped, but somehow the panic she expected didn't come. Instead, there was a strange sense of inevitability, as if she'd been walking toward this moment her entire life. A contraction seized her, stronger than any before, and she gripped the nearest crib for support. The bundle inside stirred slightly, not breathing, she realized with a chill, but moving nonetheless. She jerked her hand away, but the motion sent her stumbling deeper into the room. Each crib held an infant, she saw now, all perfectly preserved, all wearing the same expression of peaceful sleep. But their skin had a waxy quality that made her stomach lurch, and when she looked closely, she could see no rise and fall of breathing, no flutter of pulse in their tiny throats. They were dead, all of them. "My collection," came the voice, and this time Sarah saw its source, a woman emerging from the shadows between the cribs, tall and ageless, wearing a dress that seemed to shimmer between white and silver. Her face was kind, almost motherly, but her eyes held depths that made Sarah's vision swim. "Who are you?" Sarah gasped, another contraction building like a wave. "I have many names, dear one, but you may call me the midwife." The woman approached with fluid grace, her hands extended in a gesture that might have been comforting if not for the wrongness radiating from her presence. "I've been waiting for you." "Waiting for?" Sarah doubled over as the contraction peaked, her body demanding she push despite her terror. "This isn't possible. I crashed randomly. I found this place by accident." The midwife's smile was gentle and terrible. "There are no accidents, Sarah. Only appointments we've forgotten making." She gestured to the cribs surrounding them. "All of these mothers thought as you do. All believed their arrival here was chance." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees on the soft carpet between the cribs. The urge to push was overwhelming now, her body taking over despite her mind's screams of protest. This was happening whether she willed it or not. "Why?" she whispered. "What do you want?" "To help you, child. To ease the burden of loss that waits ahead." The midwife knelt beside her, cool hands reaching for Sarah's face. "Your daughter will not survive the birth. I've seen it written in the spaces between heartbeats. But here, in my care, she can be preserved, perfect, eternal." Sarah shook her head violently, trying to crawl away, but another contraction pinned her in place. "That's not true. She's healthy. The ultrasounds—" "The storm delayed you, yes? Made your journey longer than planned?" The midwife's voice was hypnotically soft. "Stress can be so dangerous for a pregnancy. Trauma, the shock of a car accident. These things have consequences." Fear flooded Sarah's system, but beneath it rose something fiercer, the protective rage of a mother confronting threat. She thought of David waiting at home, of the nursery they'd prepared together, of all the dreams they'd built around their daughter's future. She would not surrender them to this nightmare. With tremendous effort, Sarah forced herself to stand, gripping a crib rail for support. Around her, the preserved infant seemed to watch with glassy eyes, but she focused on the one thing that mattered, the living child still moving within her. "No," she said again, stronger this time. "I won't let you take her." The midwife's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her ancient eyes. "Oh, my dear child," she whispered. "You misunderstand. The choice was never yours to make." The temperature in the room plummeted, and Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs as the midwife's words settled over her like ice. The golden light from the cribs dimmed, and for the first time Sarah noticed other details that her fear had overlooked. Symbols carved into the wooden rails, strange markings that seemed to shift when she looked at them directly. The very air felt thick, charged with an energy that made her skin crawl. "What do you mean?" Sarah demanded, though part of her already knew she didn't want the answer. Another contraction was building, but she fought against it, refusing to surrender to the process while this creature watched with hungry anticipation. The midwife rose gracefully, her form seeming to elongate in the shifting light. "This place exists between moments, Sarah, between the choice of life and death. Every child here was offered to me by mothers who couldn't bear to lose them completely." She gestured to the nearest crib, where a perfect infant lay motionless. "Mrs. Morrison, 1943. Her son would have died of complications she could never understand. I saved him from that pain." Sarah's medical training kicked in, even through her terror. "Talking about stillbirth, genetic abnormalities, these are natural processes." "Natural?" The midwife's laugh was like wind chimes in a graveyard. "Tell me, Dr. Chen, what is natural about the agony of losing a child you've carried for 9 months? What is natural about the emptiness that follows, the way it hollows out everything you thought you knew about joy?" Her eyes fixed on Sarah with terrible understanding. "I offer something better, preservation. a love that lasts forever, unchanged by time or loss. The contraction hit with renewed force, and Sarah doubled over, her body betraying her attempts at resistance. Through the pain, she heard movement, soft footsteps circling her, more than one pair. When she looked up, she saw them, translucent figures moving between the cribs, women in clothing from different eras, all with the same expression of desperate grief and terrible relief. "The mothers," Sarah gasped. "My helpers," the midwife corrected gently. "They understand what you're fighting against. They remember the fear, the denial, but they also remember the peace that comes after acceptance." One of the figures approached, a young woman in a 1950s dress, her face kind but hollow. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from very far away. "I was like you," she said. "I thought I could fight it, thought my love was stronger than fate." She gestured to one of the cribs where an infant in a blue blanket lay perfectly still. But Tommy was sick, sicker than the doctors knew. She saved him from suffering, saved me from watching him fade away in some hospital bed. "This isn't salvation," Sarah said, forcing herself upright again. "This is theft. You're stealing lives before they have a chance to be lived." Another spirit materialized, older, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged in the 1920s. "My Margaret lived for 3 days, she said softly. 3 days of agony, unable to breathe properly, turning blue despite everything the doctors tried. When I came here with my next pregnancy, I begged for a different ending." Sarah's heart clenched, but she shook her head fiercely. "Some babies survive complications, medicine advances. You don't know." "We know because we've seen it," the midwife interrupted, and suddenly the room was full of them. Dozens of ghostly mothers, all reaching towards Sarah with expressions of terrible compassion. "We know because time moves differently here. We've watched the paths your choices could take, seen the futures that branch out from this moment." The spirits pressed closer, and Sarah caught fragments of their whispered stories, emergency cesareans that came too late, genetic conditions that caused slow, painful deaths, accidents and illnesses that struck in the first precious months of life. Each tale was a weight added to her chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to maintain her defiance. "Stop," she gasped. "I don't want to hear this." But one voice cut through the others, younger and more recent. A woman in modern clothes, her hair styled like something from the early 2000s. "The cord wrapped around her neck during delivery," she said. "By the time they got her breathing again, the damage was done." Years of seizures, Sarah. Years of watching her struggle for every small development, while other children ran and played and learned to speak. Tears flowed down her translucent cheeks. "The midwife showed me what could be instead. Perfect preservation at the moment of greatest potential. No suffering, no slow decline, just eternal peace." Sarah's knees buckled, but before she could fall, strong hands caught her. The midwife, suddenly there, supporting her weight with inhuman strength. The touch was cold but oddly comforting, and Sarah found her resistance wavering, despite every instinct screaming warnings. "You see," the midwife whispered, her breath like winter air against Sarah's ear. "I offer mercy, not cruelty. Your daughter will be perfect here, preserved at the moment of her greatest beauty. And you will never have to watch her suffer." Through her fear and pain, Sarah felt something else creeping in. A terrible, seductive relief. No sleepless nights wondering if she was good enough. No constant worry about illness or accident. No watching her child grow up in a world that seemed to grow more dangerous each day. Just perfect, eternal love. For one heartbeat, the temptation almost overwhelmed her. But Sarah's medical training surfaced like a life preserver in churning waters. She thought of every successful resuscitation she'd performed, every patient who defied dire predictions, every family she'd reunited against impossible odds. The emergency room had taught her that statistics weren't fate. They were challenges to be fought, overcome, proven wrong. "No," she gasped, wrenching herself away from the midwife's cold embrace. The effort sent her stumbling backward, her shoulders slamming into a crib that rocked gently. The preserved infant inside didn't stir, didn't cry out, and that unnatural stillness sent fresh determination surging through Sarah's veins. I've seen miracles happen. I've made miracles happen. The midwife's expression shifted, her maternal facade cracking to reveal something ancient and hungry beneath. You think your medical knowledge can change what has already been written? Child, I have existed since the first woman lost a baby she carried. I have seen empires rise and fall, watched your precious science advance in fits and starts, and still the outcome remains the same. The ghostly mothers pressed closer, their whispers growing urgent, desperate. Sarah could feel their need radiating outward, the need to believe their choices had been right, that their surrendered children were truly safe rather than simply stolen. They needed her to validate their terrible bargains. She's fighting us, one spirit moaned, her voice breaking. Why won't she understand? We're trying to help her. Sarah gripped the crib rail behind her, feeling another contraction building like a storm surge. But this time, she didn't fight it. Instead, she breathed through it with the measured control she'd learned from months of birthing classes. David's voice echoed in her memory, counting through the breathing exercises they'd practiced together. You're stronger than you know, he'd told her. You save lives for a living. You can do this. Because it's not help, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as the contraction peaked and ebbed. It's fear. You're all so terrified of loss that you've chosen a living death instead. She looked directly at the midwife, meeting those ancient eyes without flinching. These babies aren't saved. They're imprisoned. The temperature dropped further, frost beginning to form on the crib rails beneath Sarah's hands. The midwife's form grew taller, more terrible, her dress billowing like shadows given substance. Careful, child. You speak of things beyond your understanding. These mothers came to me willingly, seeking comfort in their darkest hour. I gave them exactly what they begged for, their children, safe forever from the cruelties of your world. Safe? Sarah's voice rose, fueled by growing outrage. Look at them. They can't laugh, can't grow, can't discover who they're meant to become. You've turned them into dolls, pretty things to be admired but never truly alive. Another contraction seized her, stronger now, and she could feel her daughter's urgent movement, not the stillness of the preserved infants, but the vital, restless energy of a child ready to be born. The midwife raised her hand, and the room grew silent. Even the ghostly mothers stopped their whispered pleas. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries, of countless bargains struck in moments of desperation. Your daughter's cord is wrapped around her neck, Sarah Chen, twice. I can see it as clearly as I see the terror in your eyes. She will emerge blue and still, and all your medical knowledge will not change that fact. But I can offer something different, a moment of perfect breath, of perfect life, preserved forever in amber. No struggle, no fear, no failure. Sarah's heart lurched, but she forced herself to think like a doctor, not a terrified mother. Nuchal cords weren't always fatal. She'd seen dozens of babies born safely despite the complication. It required quick action, skilled hands, immediate intervention, but it was survivable. Her daughter was still moving, still fighting. You're lying, she said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. You're trying to manipulate me with fears that might not even be real. The midwife smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Sarah had ever seen, full of genuine compassion twisted into something monstrous. Am I? Then why do you hesitate? Why does part of you long for the certainty I offer? You know, in the deepest part of your heart, that love and loss are inextricably linked. I simply separate them. Sarah felt the truth of those words like a physical blow. Part of her did long for that certainty, for the promise that her daughter would never know pain or disappointment, or the thousand small cruelties of growing up. The temptation was a poison spreading through her bloodstream, making her limbs heavy, her resolve uncertain. But another contraction hit, and with it came her daughter's fierce kick, a reminder that the choice wasn't just hers to make. Someone else was fighting too, someone who deserved the chance to make her own decisions about what risks were worth taking. Sarah straightened, meeting the midwife's gaze with newfound determination. "Then you don't understand love at all," she said quietly, "because real love means taking the risk." The midwife's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of cold fury that transformed her motherly features into something terrible and alien. The temperature plummeted, so drastically that ice began forming on the crib rails, and Sarah's breath came out in sharp, painful puffs that burned her lungs. "So be it," the midwife hissed, her voice now layered with harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "If you will not accept my gift willingly, then you will learn why every mother before you is ultimately chosen differently." The room exploded into chaos. The ghostly mothers began to wail, not the soft whispers of before, but agonized shrieks that pierced Sarah's skull like needles. The preserved infants in their cribs began to move, their waxy limbs twitching as if pulled by invisible strings, their glassy eyes rolling towards Sarah with accusation and hunger. But it was the vision that nearly broke her, sudden, overwhelming images flooding her mind with the force of a tsunami. She saw herself on a hospital bed, screaming as nurses rushed around her, saw David's face, white with terror, as doctors worked frantically over a blue, motionless form, watched herself months later, hollow-eyed and broken, staring at an empty nursery while David pleaded with her to eat something, anything. The images shifted, showing her other possibilities, years of medical intervention, surgeries, therapies. Her daughter struggling to breathe, to speak, to move like other children. The slow erosion of dreams, the constant fear, the guilty relief that sometimes crept in during the darkest moments of caregiving. "This is what your love will cost," the midwife said, her form towering over Sarah now, shadows writhing around her like living things. "This is what you choose when you reject my mercy." Sarah collapsed to her hands and knees as the most powerful contraction yet seized her body. The urge to push was overwhelming, but the visions wouldn't stop. An endless parade of worst-case scenarios, each more devastating than the last. She could feel her resolve cracking under the weight of possibility, the terrible uncertainty of what lay ahead. The ghostly mothers surrounded her, their hands reaching out like they wanted to comfort her, but couldn't quite make contact. "It doesn't have to be this way," one sobbed. "Please, let her help you. Let her save your baby like she saved ours." But through the pain and terror, Sarah heard something else, a memory of her own voice, speaking to a young resident who'd just lost his first patient. "The moment we stop fighting for life because we're afraid of loss, we stop being doctors. We stop being human." She'd meant those words when she'd spoken them, believed them deeply enough to build her career around them. Every day in the ER, she'd seen families face impossible odds and choose to fight anyway. Not because victory was guaranteed, but because the struggle itself had meaning. Her daughter kicked again, hard enough to take her breath away, and Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not just the physical preparation for birth, but something deeper, a clarity that cut through the midwife's manipulations like a surgical blade. "You're wrong," she gasped, forcing herself back to her knees, despite the agony radiating through her body. "This isn't about choosing between certainty and risk. It's about choosing between love and fear." The midwife's eyes blazed with inhuman fury. "Foolish child, I offer—" "You offer nothing but your own terror," Sarah interrupted, her voice growing stronger even as another contraction built. "You're so afraid of death, of loss, that you've created this place where nothing truly lives. These aren't saved children, they're trophies, evidence of every time fear won over hope." She looked around at the ghostly mothers, seeing them clearly now, not as helpers or guides, but as prisoners of their own regrets, trapped by bargains they could never unmake. "And you keep them here to validate your choices, because somewhere deep down, you know what you really are." The room began to shake, cribs rattling against each other, as the midwife's composure finally shattered completely. Her form expanded, filling the space with writhing darkness, but Sarah no longer felt overwhelmed by her presence. Instead, she felt something she hadn't expected: pity. "You were a mother once," she realized. the understanding hitting her like a physical blow. You lost a child, and this is what it did to you. You've been trying to undo that loss for centuries, stealing other children to fill the void. The darkness around the midwife flickered, and for just a moment, Sarah saw something else, a woman in ancient robes, holding an infant that had never taken its first breath, her face twisted with a grief so profound it had literally reshaped reality around her. "I saved them," the midwife whispered, but her voice cracked with uncertainty for the first time. "I saved them all from what I couldn't save my son from." Sarah felt her body preparing for the final stage of labor, but she no longer fought against it. Instead, she embraced it, embraced the risk and uncertainty and terrifying beauty of bringing new life into an imperfect world. "Then let me save you," she said, and pushed. The moment Sarah began to push, everything went catastrophically wrong. The midwife's scream of rage tore through the cabin like a physical force, shattering the windows and sending shards of ice-cold glass raining down around them. The preserved infants in their cribs began to convulse violently, their waxy limbs jerking as if electrified, while the ghostly mothers dissolved into writhing smoke that filled the air with the stench of decay. But it was what happened to Sarah's body that brought true terror. The contraction that should have brought her daughter closer to life instead brought agony unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Something was wrong, desperately, horribly wrong. She felt her daughter's movements becoming frantic, then weakening, then stopping altogether. The cord wasn't just wrapped around her neck, it was tightening with each push, cutting off oxygen, cutting off life. "No," Sarah gasped, her medical knowledge warring with maternal instinct. She could feel her daughter slipping away, could sense the precious life inside her beginning to fade. "No, no, no." The midwife's laughter echoed through the chaos, triumphant and terrible. "Did you think defying me would change what was already written? Your courage has only hastened what I offered to prevent." Sarah tried to stop pushing, tried to give her daughter time to recover, but her body betrayed her. The labor had progressed too far, and her muscles contracted involuntarily, driving her baby further into distress with each agonizing wave. Through her terror, she realized the horrible truth. The midwife hadn't been lying about the cord. The vision had been real. The ghostly mothers reformed around her, their faces no longer pleading but filled with terrible knowing. "We tried to warn you," one sobbed. "We tried to make you understand. This is why we chose differently." Sarah's hands flew to her belly, feeling for movement, for any sign that her daughter was still fighting. For one heart-stopping moment, there was nothing, just stillness and the growing certainty that she had made a catastrophic mistake. Her defiance, her determination to choose hope over fear, had killed the very thing she'd been trying to protect. "Please," she whispered, all her earlier strength crumbling. "Please, I'll do anything. Take the deal, take whatever you want. Just save her." But the midwife's expression had changed, her fury replaced by something far worse, disappointed pity. "It's too late for bargains, child. You had your chance to preserve her at the moment of perfection. Now there is only loss." The cabin around them began to shift and warp, the careful preservation spell breaking down as the midwife's power destabilized. Wallpaper peeled away in long strips, revealing rotting wood beneath. The warm fire in the hearth sputtered and died, plunging them into bitter cold. Even the cribs began to decay, their precious cargo crumbling to dust as centuries of suspended time collapsed at once. Sarah felt her own strength failing, the traumatic birth taking a toll her body couldn't sustain. Blood pooled beneath her, too much blood. In the ER, she would have called for emergency surgery, would have fought with every tool at her disposal. But here, in this place between worlds that was itself dying, there was nothing she could do but endure the consequences of her choice. "This is what your hope has brought you," the midwife said, her form beginning to fade as the cabin crumbled. "Nothing but endings. I offered eternity, and you chose mortality. For both of you." Through blinding pain, Sarah felt the final, devastating contraction. Her daughter emerged in a rush of fluid and blood, but there was no cry, no first breath, no miracle of life beginning, just terrible, absolute silence. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her baby, finding the cord wrapped twice around her tiny neck, just as the midwife had promised. Her daughter's face was blue, her lips the color of winter sky, her perfect little body utterly still. Sarah's medical training kicked in automatically. She unwrapped the cord with practiced movements, began infant CPR, breathed into those tiny lungs, but even as she worked, she knew it was too late. The midwife was gone now, vanished along with her ghostly servants, leaving Sarah alone in a disintegrating cabin with her dying daughter and the weight of her failed gamble. The walls creaked ominously as the structure collapsed around them, but Sarah barely noticed. All her attention was focused on the still form in her arms, on the growing certainty that her refusal to accept the supernatural bargain had cost her everything. Outside, the blizzard howled with renewed fury, and Sarah could feel the real cold creeping in as the cabin's protective warmth failed completely. She was hemorrhaging, weakening with each passing moment, trapped in a collapsing building with no hope of rescue. Her phone had been lost in the car crash. David thought she was safely at her mother's funeral, and no one knew where she was. Even if her daughter could somehow still be saved, they would both freeze to death before help arrived. Sarah closed her eyes, holding her silent baby against her chest, and realized that the midwife had won after all. But in that moment of absolute despair, something impossible happened. Sarah felt a flutter against her chest, not movement from her daughter, but something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with the dying cabin's failing heat. Her eyes snapped open, and she found herself staring not at decay and ruin, but at a room she had never seen before. The cribs were gone. The ghostly mothers had vanished. Instead, she sat in what looked like a hospital room, but one that existed outside of time itself. The walls shimmered with an opalescent quality, and through windows that shouldn't exist, she could see not the Minnesota blizzard, but something that might have been starlight, or might have been the dreams of sleeping children. And standing beside her was a woman Sarah recognized with a shock that went soul deep. Her mother, but not as she had been in those final bitter years. This was her mother, as Sarah remembered from childhood. Young and vibrant, wearing the same blue dress she'd worn to Sarah's high school graduation, the same dress she'd been buried in 3 days ago. "Mom?" Sarah's voice cracked, disbelief warring with desperate hope. Her mother smiled, the same gentle expression Sarah had missed for so long. "Hello, sweetheart. I've been waiting for you." Sarah looked down at her daughter, still motionless in her arms, then back at her mother's impossible presence. "I don't understand. The midwife, the cabin. Am I dead?" "No, darling. But you're not entirely alive either, not yet." Her mother knelt beside her, reaching out to touch the baby's forehead with infinite tenderness. "You're in the between place, where choices echo across possibilities. The midwife showed you one path, but she doesn't control all of them." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow, pieces clicking together with crystalline clarity. You're the one who led me to the cabin. Not to trap me, but to give you a choice. The midwife never offered her other victims. Her mother's expression grew sad but determined. "I've been fighting her influence for days, ever since you started driving north. She feeds on maternal fear, grows stronger with each bargain struck in desperation. But love, real love, has its own power." Sarah felt her daughter's body, so still and cold, and confusion overwhelmed her. Then why isn't she breathing? Why couldn't I save her? Her mother's hands covered Sarah's, warm and solid and impossibly real. "Because that's not how this works, sweetheart. The midwife was right about one thing. Your daughter's cord is wrapped around her neck. In the normal world, in normal time, that story ends badly, but we're not in the normal world anymore." The room around them shifted, and suddenly Sarah could see other versions of herself, other possibilities playing out like reflections in broken mirrors. In one, she accepted the midwife's bargain and watched her daughter become another preserved trophy. In another, she gave birth alone in the real cabin, and both of them froze to death. In yet another, she never crashed at all, arrived at the funeral safely, and gave birth 2 weeks later in a hospital where cord complications proved fatal despite every medical intervention. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by the cascade of potential futures and pasts. "The midwife collects mothers at moments of absolute choice," her mother explained gently. "She preys on the terror every parent feels, that love inevitably leads to loss. But she's forgotten something crucial about the nature of that choice." Sarah looked down at her daughter again, seeing not just the still form, but something else. A faint shimmer around her tiny body, as if she existed in multiple states simultaneously. What did she forget? Her mother smiled, and it was the expression Sarah remembered from bedtime stories and scraped knees and all the small moments that had built the foundation of her understanding of love. That the choice isn't between keeping them safe or losing them, Sarah. It's between letting fear make the choice for you or choosing love despite the risk. Her mother's voice grew stronger, more certain. The midwife made her bargain from grief and terror. "But you can make yours from something else entirely." Understanding flooded through Sarah, like light breaking through storm clouds. The cabin, the preserved children, the ghostly mothers, it had all been real, but it had also been a test, not of her courage or her medical knowledge, but of her fundamental understanding of what it meant to love another person. "She's not dead," Sarah said, the realization settling into her bones with absolute certainty. "She's waiting for me to choose not just her life, but the risk that comes with it." Her mother nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "Every parent faces this moment, sweetheart, not always supernaturally, not always with cabins and ancient spirits, but the choice is always the same. Perfect safety is death. Love is the willingness to embrace uncertainty." Sarah looked at her daughter and made her choice, not from desperation or fear, but from the deepest understanding she'd ever possessed about the nature of love itself. "I choose her," she whispered, "all of her, the risk and the hope and everything that comes after." Her daughter's eyes opened, bright and alive and beautifully, perfectly uncertain. The first breath came as a whisper, barely audible even in the perfect silence of the impossible room. Then, stronger, a soft cry that grew into the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard, her daughter's voice, announcing her presence to whatever universe would have them. Sarah's hands trembled as she held her baby close, feeling the miracle of a tiny heart beating against her chest. The cord was gone, not cut, not unwrapped, simply no longer a threat in this space where love had rewritten the fundamental rules of cause and effect. "She's perfect," Sarah breathed, tears streaming down her face as she studied her daughter's features. 10 tiny fingers, 10 perfect toes, dark hair that caught the otherworldly light filtering through those impossible windows. Her mother leaned closer, her smile radiant with joy and pride. "She is, and so are you, sweetheart. You chose love over certainty, hope over control. That's the hardest choice any parent ever makes." As if summoned by those words, the shimmering walls around them began to shift, showing glimpses of the real world beyond. Sarah could see David pacing frantically in their living room, phone pressed to his ear as he tried to reach her. She saw search and rescue teams mobilizing despite the blizzard, her absence finally noticed when she'd failed to call after the funeral service. "I have to get back to him," Sarah said, reality reasserting itself with painful clarity. "They don't know where I am. David must be terrified." Her mother nodded, but her expression grew serious. "You can go back, darling. Both of you can. But you need to understand, the midwife's power isn't completely broken. She's ancient, fed by centuries of maternal fear. Your choice wounded her, sent her into retreat, but she's not gone." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Minnesota winter. "What does that mean?" "It means other mothers will face what you faced. The cabin will call to them in their moments of greatest terror, offering false comfort and impossible bargains. Her mother's eyes reflected depths of knowledge Sarah couldn't fully grasp. Someone needs to warn them. Someone needs to help them make the choice from love instead of fear. The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders, but instead of feeling crushing, it felt like purpose. She thought of all the mothers she'd seen in the ER, women facing complications, loss, the terrible uncertainty that came with bringing life into a dangerous world. How many of them might be vulnerable to the midwife's manipulations? How, she asked, how do I fight something like that? Her mother reached out and touched her granddaughter's cheek with infinite tenderness, the same way you just did, by choosing love, by helping others understand that perfect safety is an illusion, but love, real love, makes the risk worthwhile. Sarah felt her daughter's grip tighten around her finger. Such a small gesture, but one that anchored her completely to this moment, this choice, this new understanding of what it meant to be a mother. I won't let her take anyone else. You won't be alone in this, her mother promised. The ghostly mothers you saw, they weren't all willing prisoners. Some were like you, women who tried to resist but didn't understand the true nature of the choice they faced. Your victory gives them hope, gives them a chance to find peace, instead of remaining trapped by their regrets. The impossible room began to fade around them, the otherworldly light dimming as the normal world reasserted its claim on them. Sarah could feel the cold creeping back in, could hear the distant howl of wind through broken windows. The cabin was returning to what it truly was, a deteriorating structure in the middle of a blizzard. Mom, Sarah reached out, suddenly desperate not to lose this connection again, not to face the future without her mother's guidance. I'll always be with you, sweetheart, her mother said, her form already becoming translucent. Every time you choose hope over fear, every time you help another mother understand that love is worth the risk, I'll be there, we'll be there, all the mothers who chose love in the end. The last thing Sarah saw of her mother was that radiant smile, the one that had sustained her through childhood fears and adolescent heartbreak, now offered as benediction for the challenges ahead. Then she was back in the real cabin, holding her breathing, crying, beautifully alive daughter in a room that was rapidly losing its battle against the Minnesota winter. But Sarah no longer felt afraid. Her phone, miraculously, had survived the crash and still held a fading charge. Her fingers flew over the screen, sending David their GPS coordinates, along with a message that everything was going to be all right. As she waited for rescue, Sarah looked down at her daughter and made a silent promise. She would tell this story. She would help other mothers understand the choice between fear and love, and she would make sure the midwife never claimed another child. Her daughter's eyes opened again, meeting hers with startling awareness, and Sarah could swear she saw agreement there, a partnership forged in the space between worlds, ready to face whatever came next together. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the dying storm like salvation itself. Sarah pressed her daughter closer to her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of that precious heartbeat as rescue finally arrived. Through the cabin's frost-covered windows, she could see searchlights sweeping across the snow, hear voices calling her name over the wind. "We're here," she shouted, though her voice was hoarse from exhaustion and cold. "We're both here." The next few hours blurred together in a cascade of medical checks, warm blankets, and David's tears as he held them both in the helicopter. Her daughter, Emma, Sarah decided in that moment, the name feeling absolutely right, submitted to the paramedics' examination with remarkable calm. Perfectly healthy, they declared with amazement. No signs of distress, no complications from what should have been a traumatic birth in impossible conditions. David couldn't stop touching them both, as if confirming their reality. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered against Sarah's hair. "When the funeral home said you never arrived, when they found your car." "I know," Sarah murmured back, watching Emma's dark eyes track the movement of light through the helicopter windows. "I know, but we're okay. We're more than okay." But even as she said the words, Sarah felt the weight of her promise to her mother, the responsibility she'd accepted in that impossible space between worlds. The midwife was still out there, wounded but not defeated, Other mothers would face that terrible choice, and Sarah was perhaps the only person who could help them understand what it truly meant. The hospital stay was mercifully brief. Emma thrived despite her unconventional arrival, nursing strongly and sleeping peacefully in ways that made the nurses comment on what a remarkably serene baby she was. David hovered protectively, barely leaving their side, still processing the near miss they'd somehow survived. It was Dr. Martinez, Sarah's colleague from the ER, who first noticed the change in her. "You seem different," she observed during one of her visits. "Not traumatized, which I'd expect after what you went through, more focused. Like you found something you didn't know you were looking for." Sarah shifted Emma to her shoulder, feeling the warm weight of her daughter's trust. "I have, actually. I think I need to make some changes to my practice, expand beyond emergency medicine." She'd been thinking about it constantly, how to honor her promise without sounding completely insane. The answer had come to her gradually: maternal mental health, postpartum depression, anxiety disorders, the psychological challenges that could make new mothers vulnerable to supernatural predators who fed on fear and desperation. "I want to specialize in supporting mothers through difficult pregnancies and births," Sarah continued, the plan crystallizing as she spoke. "The ones facing complications, loss, impossible choices. I think there's a real need there that conventional medicine isn't addressing." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "There absolutely is. The psychological component of maternal care is hugely underserved. But Sarah, that's not exactly an easy field. You'll see a lot of heartbreak, a lot of families dealing with outcomes that can't be fixed." "I know," Sarah said, remembering the ghostly mothers' faces, their decades of regret and fear. "But I also think I have something unique to offer them, a perspective on hope that might make a difference." Over the following weeks, as Emma settled into the rhythm of life outside the womb, Sarah began laying the groundwork for her new direction. She reached out to colleagues, researched programs, started the process of additional certification in maternal psychology. David supported her completely, though she could see questions in his eyes about what had really happened in that cabin. She hadn't told him the full truth. How could she? Instead, she'd focused on the outcome, their daughter's miraculous survival, her own newfound clarity about her purpose. The supernatural elements remained her burden to carry, at least for now. But late at night, when Emma was sleeping and David was lost in his own dreams, Sarah found herself researching other things. Missing person reports involving pregnant women. Stories of mothers who disappeared during difficult pregnancies, only to be found days later with no memory of where they'd been. Forums where women shared strange dreams about cabins in the woods, about choices that felt like life and death. The midwife was still hunting. Sarah could feel it like a distant storm on the horizon, gathering strength from humanity's endless supply of maternal fear. But now she knew something the ancient entity didn't expect. There was someone watching back, someone who understood the true nature of the choice and was prepared to help others make it from love instead of terror. Emma stirred in her bassinet, making the soft sounds that meant she'd wake soon, wanting to nurse. Sarah reached for her, marveling again at the miracle of her daughter's existence, the reality of their shared survival. "We have work to do, little one," she whispered, settling Emma against her chest. "Mothers to help, families to save. Your grandmother was right. Love is always worth the risk." Emma's dark eyes opened, meeting hers with that same startling awareness she'd shown in the cabin. For just a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw starlight reflected there. Not the harsh glitter of winter, but the warm glow of infinite possibilities. The final confrontation was coming. Sarah could feel it approaching like spring after the longest winter. But this time, she'd be ready. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, 3 months after Emma's impossible birth. Sarah woke instantly, her body already moving toward the phone before her conscious mind fully processed the sound. Beside her, David stirred but didn't wake, exhausted from his own sleepless nights adjusting to fatherhood. Emma remained perfectly still in her bassinet, that preternatural calm she'd possessed since birth undisturbed by the electronic intrusion. Dr. Chen. Sarah's voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She knew somehow that this was it, the moment everything had been building toward. Doctor, this is dispatch. We have a situation. Pregnant woman, approximately 30 to 6 weeks, reported missing 6 hours ago during the storm. Her car was found abandoned on Highway 12, but there's no sign of her. Highway 12, the same route Sarah had taken to her mother's funeral, the same stretch of road where everything had changed. Search and rescue? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer would be inadequate. Grounded until the weather clears. Visibility is near zero, winds gusting to 60 miles per hour. We're organizing ground teams, but the dispatcher's voice carried the weight of grim reality. In conditions like these, a pregnant woman alone in the wilderness had hours at best. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar tug she'd been expecting, that sense of supernatural awareness that had never quite left her after her encounter with the midwife. Somewhere out in the storm, another mother was facing the same terrible choice Sarah had survived. Another opportunity for the ancient entity to claim both mother and child. "What's the woman's name?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her clothes with her free hand. Rebecca Morrison, 28 years old, high-risk pregnancy due to placental complications. She was driving to Minneapolis for an emergency consultation when the storm hit. Placental complications. Exactly the kind of medical crisis that would make a mother desperate enough to accept any bargain, any promise of safety for her child. The midwife had chosen her target well. "I'm coming in," Sarah said, then hesitated. "Actually, no. Send me the coordinates of where they found her car. I know this area better than most of the search teams." It wasn't entirely a lie. She did know these roads from her childhood visits to Minnesota, but more importantly, she knew something the search teams didn't. They weren't looking for someone lost in the conventional sense. They were looking for someone who'd been called. David woke as Sarah dressed in layers of winter gear she hadn't touched since that night in January. "Sarah, what's happening?" "Missing person," she said simply, checking her medical bag for supplies that might be needed in impossible circumstances. "Pregnant woman, lost in the storm." David sat up, instantly alert. "You can't go out there. The weather—" "I have to." Sarah met his eyes, seeing her own determination reflected in his worried gaze. "David, if I don't go, she'll die." "They both will." It was the truth, though not in any way he could understand. The midwife was patient, cunning, but she followed patterns Sarah was beginning to recognize. The storm, the isolation, the medical emergency that made death seem inevitable, all of it designed to break down a mother's resistance until the supernatural bargain seemed like the only option. Emma made a soft sound from her bassinet, and both parents looked toward her. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, her dark eyes were open, tracking between them with that unsettling awareness that had characterized her from birth. For just a moment, Sarah could swear she saw understanding there, recognition of what was at stake. "Take me with you," David said suddenly. Sarah shook her head. "Too dangerous. And someone needs to stay with Emma." "Sarah, you almost died out there 3 months ago. I can't—" "I won't die." Sarah's voice carried absolute certainty, born from her encounter with powers beyond normal understanding. "I know what I'm facing this time. I know how to fight it." She kissed him quickly, then moved to Emma's bassinet. Her daughter's tiny hand wrapped around her finger with startling strength, and Sarah felt the familiar warmth that had sustained her through the darkest moments in that impossible cabin. "Watch over Daddy," she whispered. "Mommy has to save someone." The drive through the storm felt like traveling backward through time, each mile bringing her closer to the supernatural battlefield where she'd first learned the true meaning of maternal love. The GPS coordinates led her to a familiar stretch of wilderness, though not to the exact location of her own crash. The midwife was careful not to repeat herself too precisely. Sarah parked her SUV and stepped into the howling wind, her medical bag slung across her shoulder and something else in her coat pocket, a photo of Emma, taken the morning after they'd returned from the hospital. In it, her daughter's eyes held that same starlight awareness, the same sense of infinite possibilities that had marked their shared victory over fear itself. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, Rebecca Morrison was running out of time, but this time the midwife wouldn't be facing a terrified, isolated mother making desperate bargains in the dark. This time she'd be facing someone who understood that love was always worth the risk. The cabin materialized from the blizzard exactly as Sarah had expected. Warm light spilling from frost-covered windows, smoke rising impossibly straight from the chimney despite the howling wind. But this time, Sarah didn't stumble toward it in desperation. This time, she approached with purpose, her boots crunching through snow that seemed to part before her like a pathway meant to be traveled. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing the same impossible warmth within. Sarah could hear voices, one pleading, one soothing with ancient authority. She was almost too late. "Rebecca!" Sarah called out as she stepped across the threshold. "Don't listen to her!" The scene inside froze like a tableau from a nightmare. Rebecca Morrison knelt on the floor beside the fireplace, her hands clutched around her swollen belly, tears streaming down her face. Above her stood the midwife, exactly as Sarah remembered. Ageless and terrible, with eyes like winter stars and hands that seemed to pull light from the air itself. But now, Sarah could see what she'd missed before in her own terror. The midwife's form flickered at the edges, translucent in places where her ancient power had been damaged. She was wounded, weakened by Sarah's choice 3 months ago, sustained now only by the desperate fear radiating from Rebecca. "You!" the midwife hissed, her voice carrying the sound of wind through dead trees. "You should not have come back." "I came back because I understand now," Sarah said, stepping protectively in front of Rebecca. "I know what you really are, not a savior, a parasite. You feed on our fear, our love, our willingness to sacrifice anything for our children." Rebecca looked up at Sarah with wild, desperate eyes. "She says she can save my baby. The bleeding started an hour ago, and there's no way to get to a hospital in time. She says she can stop it, make everything perfect." Sarah knelt beside Rebecca, her medical training automatically assessing the situation, even as her supernatural awareness tracked the midwife's movements. Blood on Rebecca's clothes, cramping that indicated possible placental abruption, a genuine emergency that would terrify any mother. "I'm a doctor," Sarah said gently, taking Rebecca's hands in hers. "And I need you to listen to me very carefully. Yes, you're having complications. Yes, it's serious. But that doesn't mean the only choice is surrendering your child to her." The midwife circled them like a predator, her form becoming more solid as Rebecca's fear spiked. "Tell her about your own choice, Dr. Chen. Tell her how you begged me to save your daughter." "I did beg," Sarah admitted, never taking her eyes off Rebecca. "I was terrified, alone, convinced I was about to lose everything that mattered. She offered me a bargain, my daughter's life, in exchange for accepting her death. Perfect safety in return for perfect loss." Rebecca's grip tightened on Sarah's hands. "But your baby lived. I saw the news stories about the miraculous birth. My baby lived because I chose differently." Sarah reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Emma's photo, holding it so both Rebecca and the midwife could see it. "I chose to fight for both of us, to accept the risk because love, real love, doesn't bargain with death, it faces the unknown together." The midwife's form wavered, her star-cold eyes fixed on the photograph. "Impossible. I felt her die. I prepared her place among my children." "You felt what you wanted to feel," Sarah said, standing slowly while keeping Rebecca's hands in hers. "You're so ancient, so removed from real maternal love that you can't tell the difference between acceptance and surrender. I didn't accept my daughter's death. I accepted that loving her meant risking everything, including loss." The temperature in the cabin began to drop, frost forming on the windows as the midwife's fury manifested. "You think your small victory makes you strong enough to stand against me? I have claimed children for millennia, and I think that's exactly why you've become so weak." Sarah helped Rebecca to her feet, her medical bag ready. Every child you've stolen, every mother you've broken, it's all been built on fear. But fear isn't sustainable. It consumes itself eventually. Sarah turned to Rebecca, who was watching the confrontation with a mixture of terror and dawning hope. I won't lie to you about the medical situation. Placental abruption can be life-threatening. But I can help you, and there are ambulances coming. The choice isn't between your baby's death and her imprisonment. It's between giving up and fighting for both your lives. You offer her nothing but false hope, the midwife snarled, her form becoming more solid, more terrible. I offer certainty, perfection. Her child will never know pain, never face loss, never live, Sarah interrupted. Never grow, never choose, never love. You're not offering salvation, you're offering beautiful death. Rebecca straightened, her hands still pressed to her belly, but her voice growing stronger. I want to fight. I want us both to have a real chance. The words hit the midwife like physical blows, her ancient form beginning to crack and fragment. Sarah felt the photo in her hands grow warm, Emma's impossible starlight eyes seeming to shine with their own light. The final battle had begun. The midwife's scream shattered the windows, sending shards of ice cascading inward like frozen tears. Her form expanded, filling the cabin with shadows that moved independently of any light source, reaching toward Rebecca with fingers that promised eternal stillness. You cannot unmake millennia of necessity, she howled, her voice fracturing into harmonics that spoke of every mother's worst fears. I am the inevitable outcome, the mercy that ends suffering. Sarah stepped between the reaching shadows and Rebecca, feeling them recoil from Emma's photograph like living things afraid of fire. But even as the midwife pulled back, Sarah could sense the ancient entity gathering herself for one final assault, not just on Rebecca, but on everything Sarah had fought to protect. She's too strong, Rebecca gasped, her medical crisis intensifying under the supernatural pressure. The bleeding's getting worse. Maybe we should... No, Sarah's voice cut through the chaos with absolute certainty. But I need to tell you something about the cost of winning this fight. The midwife paused, sensing opportunity in Sarah's words. Yes, tell her about the price. Tell her what victory will demand. Sarah looked down at Emma's photograph, seeing her daughter's impossible eyes staring back at her with that starlight awareness. In those depths, she glimpsed the truth she'd been avoiding since the moment she'd first defeated the midwife, a truth that had been growing stronger with each passing day. The connection works both ways, Sarah said quietly, her words meant for Rebecca, but her gaze fixed on the photo. When I saved Emma, when I chose love over fear, I didn't just wound the midwife. I became something else, something that can sense when mothers are in danger, that can find this place when others need help. Rebecca's eyes widened with understanding. You're like her now, part of whatever this is. Part of the balance, Sarah corrected. The midwife feeds on maternal despair, grows stronger from mothers who surrender their children to beautiful death. But there has to be an opposite force, someone who feeds on maternal hope, who grows stronger from mothers who choose to fight for real life. The midwife's form solidified with renewed fury. You begin to understand the trap you've created for yourself. You cannot save this woman without becoming my eternal enemy, bound to hunt me across centuries. Your comfortable human life, your husband, your daughter's normal childhood, all sacrificed to become a guardian against something most people will never believe exists. Sarah felt the weight of the choice settling over her like destiny itself. To save Rebecca, to truly defeat the midwife, she would have to accept her transformation completely, no more pretending she could return to normal emergency medicine, no more hiding behind rational explanations for what had happened in the cabin. She would spend the rest of her life standing between desperate mothers and an ancient predator, fighting battles in spaces between worlds that existed only when hope and fear collided. Sarah, you don't have to do this for me, Rebecca said, though her voice carried desperate need. Don't sacrifice your family for... I'm not sacrificing them. Sarah pressed Emma's photograph against her chest, feeling her daughter's warmth across impossible distance. "I'm showing them what love really means, what it's always meant." She thought of David, asleep at home with their miracle daughter. He would understand eventually. He'd fallen in love with a woman who ran toward danger to save lives. This was just a broader definition of both danger and salvation. And Emma had been born from this supernatural battlefield. She would grow up knowing that her mother was exactly where she belonged. "Besides," Sarah continued, turning to face the midwife directly, "someone needs to teach you what you never learned in all your millennia of existence." The ancient entity's star-cold eyes narrowed. "And what lesson could a mortal possibly—" "That maternal love isn't about preventing loss," Sarah interrupted, feeling power flow through her like warm light, drawing strength from every mother who had ever chosen hope over certainty. "It's about being brave enough to love anyway, to fight for life knowing it includes pain, growth, change, risk. You offer mothers a counterfeit love, one that never grows, never deepens, never becomes anything more than fear wearing a pretty mask." The cabin began to shake as the two opposing forces, despair and hope, stasis and growth, beautiful death and messy life, collided with the weight of cosmic necessity. Rebecca clung to Sarah's arm as the supernatural storm built around them. "I choose real love," Sarah declared, feeling her transformation complete itself. "I choose the fight that never ends, the hope that grows stronger from being tested, and I choose to make sure no mother ever faces you alone again." Emma's photograph burst into starlight between her fingers, and the final battle erupted around them like the birth of a new world. The starlight from Emma's photograph expanded outward like a supernova, washing over the cabin in waves of warm brilliance that made the midwife's ancient form writhe and fragment. Her scream became a harmony of defeat, centuries of stolen children crying out as her hold on them finally broke. Through the blazing light, Sarah saw them clearly for the first time, not perfectly preserved infants sleeping in eternal peace, but souls that had been trapped between life and death, finally free to continue their interrupted journeys. The midwife's body cracked like ice under spring sun, revealing the hollow core beneath her maternal masquerade. This is not possible. I am eternal. I am necessary." "You were never necessary," Sarah said, her voice carrying new authority that resonated through dimensions she was only beginning to understand. "You were just the easiest answer to an impossible fear. But easy answers aren't love. They're just fear dressed up in prettier clothes." With a final keening wail that sounded like wind through empty cradles, the midwife shattered completely. The fragments of her form dissolved into mist that was quickly absorbed by the starlight, purified and transformed into something that felt like blessing rather than curse. The supernatural cold that had gripped the cabin for millennia lifted, replaced by the honest warmth of a real fire, burning real wood, in a space that had finally chosen to exist fully in one world. Rebecca collapsed against Sarah's shoulder, her breathing ragged but stable. The bleeding had stopped, not through supernatural intervention, but because her body had found its own way back to balance once the midwife's presence was no longer amplifying her terror. "Is it over?" Rebecca whispered, her hands protective over her belly. Sarah looked around the cabin, seeing it clearly for the first time. Without the midwife's influence, it was simply an old hunting lodge, abandoned but not impossible. Real dust on real furniture, real ice forming on broken windows that would need actual repair. The supernatural elements were fading like a fever dream, leaving behind only the memory of what had been fought and won. "For tonight, yes," Sarah said, helping Rebecca toward the door. "But you still need medical attention. The abruption was real, even if the fear made it worse." As they stepped outside, Sarah heard the distant rumble of snowplows and emergency vehicles. Her own supernatural senses told her the worst of the storm was breaking, that rescue teams would reach them within the hour. Rebecca would deliver a healthy daughter in Minneapolis 3 weeks later, with David Chen listed as one of the consulting physicians on her case. A coincidence that wasn't really a coincidence at all. The walk through the snow felt different now. Each step took them further from the space between worlds and deeper into the ordinary reality where ambulances ran on gasoline and doctors carried stethoscopes instead of photographs that burned with starlight. But Sarah could still feel the change in herself, humming beneath her skin like electricity waiting to be channeled. When the first rescue vehicle appeared through the trees, Sarah felt a moment of profound disorientation. The paramedic who jumped out was someone she'd worked with dozens of times at Minneapolis General, a competent professional named Martinez, who would write this up as a successful wilderness rescue with surprisingly good medical outcomes. He would never know he was treating two women who had just rewritten the fundamental balance between hope and fear. "Dr. Chen?" Martinez stared at her in amazement. "How did you find her? We've been searching this area for hours." "Lucky guess," Sarah said, helping Martinez load Rebecca onto a stretcher. "Right place, right time." But as the ambulance pulled away with Rebecca safely aboard, Sarah remained behind, standing in the snow and looking back at the cabin. In the growing dawn light, it looked smaller, more ordinary. The supernatural architecture was gone, but she could still sense the echo of what had happened here, the moment when an ancient evil had finally met a force strong enough to answer it. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Emma's been awake all night, staring at the window like she was watching something. She just fell asleep smiling." "Are you safe?" Sarah typed back, "Coming home now." "Tell Emma that Mummy won." The drive back through the clearing storm gave Sarah time to process what she'd become. She was still Dr. Sarah Chen, emergency physician and new mother, but she was also something unprecedented, a guardian against supernatural predators that fed on maternal despair, armed with hope that had been tested in the fire of impossible choices and emerged stronger for the burning. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. David's voice was thick with sleep and relief. "I saw the news. Successful rescue, mother and baby both stable. Somehow I'm not surprised you were involved." Through their bedroom window, Sarah could see him holding Emma, both of them silhouetted against the soft morning light. Her family, safe and whole, and waiting for her to come home from a battle they would spend the rest of their lives helping her fight. "I love you," Sarah said, watching Emma's tiny hand reach toward the window as if she could sense her mother's presence across the distance. "We love you too, both of us. Always. The return." Sarah sat in her car for a long moment before opening the door, watching David move around their bedroom with Emma in his arms. Through the window she could see him swaying gently, that unconscious rhythm all new parents developed, the dance of comfort and connection. But there was something different in the way he held their daughter now, a protective alertness that suggested he'd sensed more of last night's events than she'd expected. When she finally stepped inside, the house felt both foreign and profoundly familiar. The same hardwood floors, the same family photos on the mantel, the same faint smell of coffee and baby formula. Yet Sarah moved through the space like she was learning it anew, her enhanced senses cataloguing details she'd never noticed. The exact temperature differential between rooms, the way sound carried through the walls, the subtle electromagnetic signatures of their various devices. She was still herself, but herself expanded, aware of layers of reality she'd spent her entire medical career explaining away. David appeared at the top of the stairs, Emma cradled against his chest. His hair was disheveled from a sleepless night, but his eyes were sharp with the kind of recognition that came from living with someone through their transformation. "She knew you were fighting something," he said without preamble, starting down the steps. Around midnight she stopped fussing and just watched, like she was seeing something I couldn't. Around 4 a.m. she laughed. Actually laughed, Sarah. 3-month-old babies aren't supposed to do that yet. Sarah reached for her daughter, feeling Emma's weight settle against her with perfect familiarity. But now she could sense something else, a warmth that pulsed just beneath Emma's skin, the same starlight energy that had burned through the midwife's ancient darkness. Her daughter had indeed been born from that supernatural battlefield, and some part of her would always carry its mark. "Hello, little star," Sarah whispered, and Emma's eyes, those impossible depths that had first revealed the truth about their connection, fixed on her mother's face with unmistakable awareness. David studied them both, his medical training warring with evidence that didn't fit any textbook he'd ever read. "The woman you rescued, Rebecca Morris. I looked up her case file when they brought her in. Placental abruption, significant bleeding, but by the time she reached the hospital, everything had stabilized. The attending physician called it miraculous. Medicine can be surprising," Sarah said carefully, but David shook his head. "Sarah, I've been an obstetrician for 12 years. I know what miraculous looks like, and I know what impossible looks like. Last night was impossible." He paused, reaching out to touch Emma's tiny hand. "Just like Emma's birth was impossible. The question is whether you're ready to tell me what that means for our family." Sarah moved to the window, looking out at their neighborhood, tree-lined streets where children played and parents worried about normal things like homework and college funds and whether they were raising their kids right. For a moment, she felt a sharp pang of loss for the life she'd thought they would have: predictable challenges, ordinary fears, a medical practice focused on broken bones and heart attacks instead of supernatural predators. But then Emma made one of her soft baby sounds, and Sarah felt that warm pulse of starlight energy again, stronger now that she was home. This wasn't a burden imposed on them. It was a gift they'd been chosen to carry, a responsibility that would grow alongside their love for each other. "It means we're going to have a very unusual life," Sarah said finally. "There are mothers out there who will face what I faced, impossible choices between love and fear, between hope and beautiful death, and now I can find them, help them, fight for them when they can't fight for themselves." David joined her at the window, his arms sliding around her waist with the easy intimacy of a man who'd already decided to follow his wife into whatever strangeness awaited them. "Will it be dangerous?" he asked. "Sometimes. But David, I've been walking into dangerous situations my entire career. This is just a broader definition of emergency medicine." Emma gurgled contentedly between them, her tiny fingers grasping at the morning light streaming through the window. In that light, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch. Just for an instant, Emma's eyes reflected not just starlight, but the shapes of other faces, other mothers, other children, scattered across distances both geographical and supernatural, all connected now by the network of hope Sarah had become part of. "When do we start?" David asked, and Sarah realized he'd seen it too, that flash of connection, the evidence that their daughter would grow up knowing exactly how vast and strange and wonderful the world really was. "We already have," Sarah said, holding their miracle baby closer. "We already have." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the nursery they'd converted into Emma's playroom, watching her daughter reach for toys with the focused determination of a child who understood more than she could express. At 9 months old, Emma was hitting every developmental milestone with remarkable precision, and several that didn't appear in any pediatric textbook. Yesterday, she'd looked directly at a photograph of Rebecca's healthy baby girl and clapped her hands, somehow recognizing another child born from the network of hope they'd all become part of. The house had become a different kind of emergency center. Sarah's medical bag now contained items that would puzzle any conventional physician: a compass that pointed toward supernatural disturbances, photographs that burned warm when maternal despair spiked in their vicinity, and a small silver pendant that Emma had somehow created by touching a piece of jewelry with her starlight-warm fingers. Their landline received calls at impossible hours, women's voices, sometimes sobbing, sometimes whispering, always desperate. They never had to explain how they'd found the number. David had taken a research position at the university, ostensibly studying high-risk pregnancy outcomes, but actually documenting patterns that suggested supernatural intervention. His medical colleagues thought he was pursuing an interesting statistical analysis. Only Sarah knew he was mapping the midwife's historical hunting grounds and developing early warning systems for her eventual return, because ancient evils, they'd learned, rarely stayed defeated forever. "She's getting stronger," David observed, entering the nursery with coffee for both of them. It had become their morning routine, checking Emma for new developments, reviewing any overnight calls, preparing for whatever the day might bring. Yesterday, she pointed at the calendar on the day Mrs. Patterson called from Oregon. 3 hours before the phone actually rang. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich scent that had become her anchor to ordinary life. "The network is expanding. I can feel it sometimes, mothers choosing hope over fear, fighting for their children in ways both medical and mystical. Each one makes the whole system stronger." Through the window, their neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had before Emma's birth. Children waiting for school buses, parents juggling work schedules and carpools, dogs being walked along familiar sidewalks. But Sarah could sense the deeper currents now, the wells of love and terror that existed in every home where families were growing, changing, learning to navigate the beautiful complexity of caring for each other. Her phone buzzed, a text message from Rebecca in Minneapolis. "Emma started walking yesterday, walked directly to the window and pointed north toward your direction. Then she said, Sarah, clear as day. Her first word, thank you." Sarah showed David the message, watching his expression shift through the now familiar sequence: medical skepticism, supernatural acceptance, and finally, the quiet pride of a father whose daughter was connected to something miraculous. "We're going to need a bigger house eventually," he said. "Somewhere with space for the women who need to stay longer, recover more slowly. And Emma's going to need room to grow into whatever she's becoming." Emma herself looked up at the sound of her name, her impossible eyes reflecting that starlight awareness that had first revealed her true nature. She was a beautiful baby by any measure, David's strong jaw softened by Sarah's delicate features, thick dark hair that caught light like spun silk. But when she smiled, as she was smiling now, Sarah glimpsed the powerful force her daughter would become, a guardian born from the space between worlds, raised in love that had been tested by cosmic battles and emerged victorious. "Mama," Emma said clearly, reaching her small arms up with perfect trust that she would be lifted, held, protected. Sarah gathered her daughter close, feeling that familiar pulse of warmth that connected them to mothers and children across vast distances. The responsibility would grow heavier as Emma got older, as more women found their number and more supernatural threats emerged to challenge the balance they'd fought to establish. There would be dangerous nights, impossible choices, battles fought in places that existed only when hope and fear collided. But looking down at Emma's trusting face, surrounded by the love that had made all of this possible, Sarah felt only profound gratitude for the path that had led them here. She was still Dr. Sarah Chen, emergency physician and protector of life. David was still the steady, brilliant man who'd chosen to build a family with her. Emma was their miracle baby, born from starlight and maternal courage. They were also something unprecedented, a family forged in supernatural fire, bound together by love strong enough to rewrite the rules of life and death. Whatever came next, and Sarah could sense larger challenges gathering on the horizon like storm clouds, they would face it together. Emma nestled against her mother's chest, her tiny hand resting over Sarah's heart, and for a perfect moment, the universe felt exactly as it should be, dangerous, beautiful, and infinite with possibility.